I've struggled to write a video about Bloodborne for a really long time. When I thought of making a Bloodborne video, it came in any number of forms. A 1-hour epic describing its impressive technical elements, a look at how different of an experience it could become for any type of player. At one point, it was even a thorough exploration of its world building and lore, despite my propensity to whiff so hard in attempting to catch From Software's screwball-like storytelling that it sails right by me and hits a poor unsuspecting bystander in the face. But like you may have guessed, considering I'm talking about it here, nothing stuck. I've snuck it into other videos plenty, to the point that finding trailer b-roll for this video that I hadn't overused already was a challenge in and of itself, but making a video about just Bloodborne felt nigh impossible. Part of the reason why is I find it difficult to actually quantify why this game is so much better than almost any other game I've ever played. Bloodborne is such a weird thing for me. When I think about it critically, there's plenty of sections in this game that failed to hit, there's some underlying technical problems, and part of me feels like I haven't even experienced it in the best way. I'm still a little bit shaky on the lore even after countless Vati video binges, and I haven't really experimented with builds, and yet despite that, it's still my second favorite game ever made. I just platinumed Elden Ring last night, and I can safely say that it gave me everything I could have wanted out of it and more. It's already solidified itself as one of the all-time greats in my mind, with brain-bending levels of freedom that recontextualize how I personally play games, and while still giving me everything I love from this developer, and yet, at the end of the day, I still like Bloodborne better. I've had endless discussions about this with my brother over the past few years. The both of us are just at a loss as to why we can point to so many things in each of these games that they do better than Bloodborne, some of which should matter more than Bloodborne's best traits, and yet that game is still undisputedly our favorite. To try and find an answer to why this was, I rewatched H-Bomber-Guy's video on the topic, and while I agreed with most of it, and some of it was closely tied to elements of the game that I've praised myself in the past, it still couldn't come close to conveying why I connected with this game so hard. It was a great breakdown of the intelligent design decisions that went into that title, but it didn't even scratch the surface of the game's overwhelming magnetism. What actually finally brought everything together for me though was when I remembered a tweet that I saw a few days ago, one that I can't seem to be able to track down now, and it makes me really annoyed. But the gist of it was that people who critique things can spend an unreasonable amount of time sprinkling in colorful words and well thought out deconstructions of a certain work, and then somebody can come in and say, this ain't got no sauce, and it means infinitely more than whatever the hell those other people were saying. Emotion is the crux of all entertainment, and yet I think when people make critiques or reviews, and this goes for me as well, we get overly concerned with the technicalities. Those are great for creating the foundations of arguments and purely discussing the construction of a certain work, but it hardly ever manages to capture that important factor of emotion. I think that was always my block with writing a dedicated video about this game. I could spend 4 hours explaining why the systems in it are so great, but it's far more true to my experience to try and express how Bloodborne makes me feel for 4 minutes. And what I feel is that Bloodborne just has more sauce than your favorite game. Bloodborne's greatness, even more so than its soul's brethren, lies in its intangible elements. Even specific mechanics that you can outright pinpoint, like the rally system, are less impressive for their direct merits and more so for their psychological impacts. This simple system tricks you into playing the game in a certain way with a certain cadence. I talk about atmosphere a lot when I talk about this game, but what is atmosphere? Atmosphere is playing one game while sitting on your couch and then playing a different game while sitting on the exact same couch, but somehow your environment seems different. When I think back to Bloodborne, I don't have the same experience as when I think back to other games. I don't recall major story moments or picturesque locations. I don't remember the coolest thing I did or my favorite boss or really anything concrete. When I think generally about Bloodborne, I re-experience its atmosphere. It's imprinted itself onto me. I feel that oppressive nature of a world wrought with terrifying inhabitants and a severe sense of dread and haunting beauty, followed closely by a wave of accomplishment and an overcoming of that dread, if only for brief moments. Of course, I can pick out details in my playtime if I wanted to, but my memories of it as a complete experience don't take a solid shape. Instead, I'm sucked back into that feeling above all else, and there's really only 1 or 2 more games that I can say that about. Now, I've gone on record saying that Sekiro has my favorite combat system ever, and I stand by that, but I can't think of a game that can compare to how mowing down an enemy in Bloodborne feels like. It's like you're cleansing the streets of filth. The sound design is so wet and disgusting, your opponent's so far gone. In most games, hitting an enemy multiple times with a sharp-ass sword and them just casually shrugging it off is a thing that we just accept, even though it kinda doesn't make any sense. I don't care how strong you are, man. If I'm using a massive Unga Bunga sword to stab you directly through the midsection and you're insides go flying out, you shouldn't be able to just get up and stomp around, but whatever, it's a game, it's way more fun like this. And to be clear, Bloodborne's technically no different, but the combat is so raw and violent and beastly that with the context of the game, it all kind of makes a twisted sense. You're absolutely shredding through enemies with each hit, their beastly forms too far removed from their humanity to notice or react past a quick wince until you cut them up entirely. The game doesn't really do anything different here, it's the same objectively silly thing that requires you to suspend your disbelief, and yet for some reason, it just feels different here. From Software's games always feel like they were made with an exceptional level of purpose. Everything is put there for a reason. I have no idea personally why there are bubble-blowing buddies in the capital city, but I'm sure there's an explanation for this. Much like that example though, I do find that that reason is often lost on me. I'm not a lore expert, I have a hard time knowing why exactly things are the way they are in the places that they're at, and that means that the world intrigues me more, but I'm understanding and finding the reasoning behind things less. That's an experience that I actually quite enjoy in these games if I'm being honest, but Bloodborne takes it a step further. The more confused I get, the more everything starts weirdly coming into focus. I feel like I know the world in an intimate way while also being oblivious to so much of it. Even in its worst moments, like boss fights with Rom, the One Reborn, or Mikolas, some of the worst bouts in the game, I feel like this depraved, confusing world is slowly uncovering its form to me, a parallel to the in-game idea of insight. The more I understand, the stranger it gets. The stranger it gets, the less I know, the more I find, and the more I find, the more I understand. Never have I loved being so confused more than I have in this game, and that's just such a weird thing to love. The more games I play, the more I value when one gives me something that I've never seen or experienced before, and Bloodborne feels like a game that's built off that very goal despite its close mechanical relations to the Souls franchise. It still feels like an enigma to me, and I don't think that it ever won't. Like anything, you can absolutely describe what things Bloodborne does well, what it does poorly, why those things exist, and how, and plenty of people have done that already, but to leave it at that feels kinda like a disservice. On a purely technical level, I think you can make a case for almost any of these games to be placed above Bloodborne. Hell, one of its biggest strengths is how it promotes fast, aggressive, and risky play, and I'd argue that Sekiro came in and pulled that idea off even better. And yet, Bloodborne is constantly topping polls asking what the best FromSoft game is. Search for the question on the From Software subreddit, and 5 of the top 6 replies are Bloodborne, which is wild when you remember that aside from Demon's Souls, Bloodborne is the least accessible to a wide audience because of its exclusivity. I can point to any of the other games in this pseudo series and say this one's got better combat, this one's got better world/level design, this one offers more freedom, this one had more build variety, this one has better bosses, this one has better hats, and that's all great. But when it comes down to it, Bloodborne just has more sauce.